check.
Can you try?
Yeah, this is what we wrote. We wrote the objective and our plan moving forward, which is one, to do the cross hedging and determination of the number of future contracts we need to purchase in order to hedge for our portfolio. And so far, we have actually made good progress. We have run a linear regression. Right now, we are testing a linear regression. We have gotten results, but we just want to test it and further test it to make sure that the regression that the hedge ratio that we have calculated is verifiably good, and it doesn't actually cause a problem for us in the future. So that's what we are doing, a testing of those of the hedge ratio right now. And also, again, we have determined the number of future contracts we need to purchase in order to hedge for the entire portfolio. But again, as I said, because we are testing the hedge ratio, the number of future contracts also we are testing the same process. Now, one of the things that we actually ran into, or I would say Asim actually pointed out during our meetings, is actually that some of the in the portfolio, what we did actually is, I think I would have mentioned it here, we determined whether a particular, based on the factor exposure of that particular equity, we determined whether it's a market risk stock or a value stock or a small cap stock. But then, if you take like examples, like I can show you the other one. Yeah, so this is the code we did. And if you look at here, for example, the mRNA has almost equal exposure to the small cap and the market risk. And that makes sense because mRNA was a small cap stock, but then after COVID, especially because of vaccine development, they've been moving very well with the market. So we found out
what are these
that,
figures right here?
so the figures here are the factor exposure
Okay.
of each of the equity, and that is in the portfolio.
It's a result of a multiple linear regression.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's what we got here, and then we found that there's some overlaps between some of the factors for some of the equities. And so that's what, in order to to better understand how to work around this, so that whether we need to just ignore it for a future contracts, or do we need to actually consider that into our hedging strategy, we just came up with some of these multi-factor scores, and this is just to a simple workaround between the three factor exposure, just to indicate or understand how or what we can do. At this time, we are just using this data, and the reason where I got this idea was I was reading a paper by S&P 500, and they had mentioned something like multi-factor score, just so that it can indicate the overlaps between overlaps of factor exposures. So right now, this is where what we are planning to do. We are planning to let me just stop here. So our plan right now is one, to test further the linear regression data. And to determine the hedge ratio, make sure that is correct. And another thing is to see if that is something that we can work around with respect to this equal exposure to multiple factors. See if we can consider that into our strategy, and then come to a conclusion. Our timeline to achieve this is the next 3 weeks before spring break. Hopefully that's our idea. That is in 1 month's time. We want to figure all this out so that we can achieve it. And yeah, I think one other thing that we are still thinking about is the value hedge ratio. In order to, because sometimes it's low, compared to like the market risk hedge ratio, we are thinking of working around, and the team and we are still going through that idea, but we just want to know if you have any ideas with respect to the hedge ratio, if it is low, something that can.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
that
that
can
all makes
help.
sense. I don't really have much like input around like the hedging ratio strategy. What I would
Yeah.
recommend though is like,
Mhm.
actually building it out because like,
Yeah.
the paper looks great, the code looks great, but at the end of the day, like you got to actually
Yeah.
test it. I would say
Yeah.
it's okay
Mhm.
if you don't have positive P&L. Like
Yeah.
if at the end of the day it doesn't come out the results you want, that's
Yeah.
okay. It's a work in progress, but at least like having something. Okay, so sounds like you guys do have something
Yeah,
because like
we did. Yeah.
okay, so
So
yeah, you treated a simulation where you bought the respective like future contracts and you looked at like
yeah.
what your final return was.
Yeah, we did. We calculated the number of
Just
futures.
to
Yeah.
so we calculated the number of contracts, but we haven't tested the performance of those
Mhm.
purchase
Yeah.
contracts yet.
Okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would definitely start with that. So like yeah, it's great that
Yeah.
you have a method to buying X amount. Like if you're thinking of an optimization problem, like it's great to understand that you have your decision variables, but at the end of the
Mhm.
day, like you have to see what the outcome looks like. It's okay if
Yeah.
the outcome is going to show you that we have 100% loss and we're losing every cent on our dollar. Like that's not
Mhm.
ideal, but that's okay because it's at least you're testing something and then you can
Yeah.
fine tune and improve it. But it's easier to get to that point. So like you're talking about like, equal weighting the strategies. I
Yeah.
love that idea, but I would put that on the back burner and
Okay.
focus on actually measuring out your performance, whether on a
Yeah.
dollar value or on a performance figure basis, to actually see
Mhm.
how it's working. And then from there, fine tuning it. The
Yeah.
other option, maybe I'm just less familiar with this, but you looked at your exposures for each individual asset security in your investment. But
Yeah.
I thought I was under the impression that we were doing this based off like hedging based on the portfolio, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so what I'm getting at is like I know a seem like last semester, a year ago, when we talked through like the optimization model, so we can determine which beta exposures we want. I thought we were trying to determine which like hedging, like how many options to buy or how many futures to purchase based off of the exposure of the portfolio, not the individual assets.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
let me a little bit explain that a little bit. So we need the exposure of the individual stock to group them into the factors. So we don't actually hedge against the individual stock, but we say,
Yeah.
let's say you're Apple, you're in the you know uh large cap stocks, and if you're, I don't
Mhm.
know, like some manufacturing company in Missouri or something, you're a small cap stock. So we just put them into the categories and we hedge the whole small
Portfolio.
cap stocks category.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
that's why we need to calculate the we need to find the find which stock is belongs to which category. So that's what we're trying to do. So we sum the weights of those stocks in the portfolio,
Mhm.
and if it's 30% of our portfolio, we hedge that 30% for the small cap with the small cap, let's say Russell 2000 futures.
Yeah.
So that's how we do it. That's why we need the individual stocks
Yeah.
values.
Oh,
Sorry
yeah,
to
no, that
interrupt.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the thing is that I had a question. So, how is the weightage allocated between the stocks? Is it equity-weighted portfolio, or how is the weightage done?
No,
Yeah.
it depends on the exposure we want at the beginning for the portfolio, and we have our we on the market, so we enter our uh, desired betas into our optimization model, and the optimization model gives us the best allocation based on those exposures that we want.
Yeah.
So, which
Just to
model are you using? CLA, IVP, or hierarchical disparity? Which model?
We're using an integer model optimization modeling. It's either a linear model or integer model based on some of the constraints.
yeah. So the optimization model essentially gets the intersectional portfolio for the achievable targets that we are given for each of the factors, and then it also tries to minimize the transaction cost with it. So and then it gives out the weights for how much of each of the equities to be actually in our portfolio. So yeah.
But I don't think transaction cost would be of issue, right? Rather than the kind of correlation that that exists between the assets that you're trying to deploy. That's how it's going to define it. The transactional cost wouldn't make a difference because you're managing portfolio rather than intraday trade. Rather than intraday trading or anything. Your rebalancing period would be pretty high.
So that's what we're trying to avoid, actually. So once we construct our portfolio, we want to use the futures to avoid the transaction costs. So if we want to, change our exposures for a certain period of time in the future, let's say over the next 3 months, rather than rebalancing the portfolio, we want to purchase futures contracts to adjust our exposure as a next step, once we have the portfolio that we want.
Yeah.
So we don't have to keep, juggling around with the stocks and everything.
Yeah. So if you want to reduce your beta, you just short it, and if you want to increase it, you just go long on the futures for each of the factors, whichever.
Okay, yeah.
And so yeah, John, we'll test it. The linear regression and the calculating the hedge ratio will we'll also give more attention to to determination of the future contracts, number of future contracts we need to purchase. And I also have to say that one of the other updates that we did is like we put everything on GitHub so that the entire project is more manageable and also easy for future team members to participate if they want to. So yes.
Perfect. Yeah, no, good idea. That all sounds great. Like you said, like earlier, I would just like emphasize like what you're trying to accomplish, which it sounds like it's a risk mitigation strategy. So if that's the case, like think about what metrics you want to measure. It sounds like you have a hedge ratio in mind. You can look at the Sharpe ratio. You could look at a few other categories to like see how volatile like the performance is over time. It's just like you're building out this model, but you want something to show for it, and the easiest way to show for that is just like having like summary stats, for example.
Yeah.
Like showing like what your hedge ratio is or like what your P&L is, just like having numbers. And then when people are like, oh, that's interesting, then you can dive deeper into the model. But you want to get to that like final stage of just having something to show for it.
Yeah. And I think Asim and I and Shishank the three of us will, create, stats so that it is much easier for us to, see where our performance for portfolio is actually.
Perfect. Yeah. No, that all sounds great.